Hey, welcome to Cultivated Live for Wednesday. Holy man, it's July 31st. I am Jay Rosenthal. I am the co-founder of Cultivated Media and the host of this program, Cultivated Live. And since we launched our goal way back in November, our goal at Cultivated has been to be cannabis industry first, providing you with the most important, insightful, useful, and timely information. And we do that through our daily newsletter, which we call Cultivated Daily, which you can find at cultivated.news and on Jeremy's shirt where it says Cultivated News. We do that through this daily live stream called Cultivated Live. We would love if you follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to us on YouTube, and most importantly, get our newsletter in your inbox every single day. And on Wednesdays, I am joined by my co-founder and our editor-in-chief, Jeremy Burke. Jeremy, welcome.
Thank you, Jay. Pleasure.
It is a pleasure. It's nice to see you as we, I guess, is this the midway point through summer? I'm not 100% sure. But we also have a guest with us. Sometimes it's just you and I, Jeremy, and we shoot the shit. But today we are joined by Joe Hodas. He is the president of Wana Brand. Joe, welcome.
Hello. Thank you guys so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, it's a pleasure. And I was saying before we came on that you need to be of a certain age to know that behind you is a poster of cassette tapes. And before Jeremy scratches his head, Jeremy, cassette tapes is what we used to listen to music on. We used to make mixtapes like from the radio or even records. It was a thing before your time, but Joe, welcome.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And Jay, one thing I didn't tell you about the cassettes is that, so it's an artist who does these collections and he photographs them. There's a bunch of stuff on there I know, and there's a bunch of stuff I don't know. So I started probably 3 months ago going cassette by cassette and listening to every single one on Spotify. So that's become my playlist every day when I listen to music.
It's really
I go through each one.
It's bridging cassettes and Spotify. Anything you found before we get to it, anything you found that struck your fancy that you didn't know before?
Well, yeah, actually there were a couple. I'm trying to remember. There was one that was really good. I think Robbie Williams was one that I never would have listened to that I thought was great. But then I've had to listen to some really, really bad ones like Kiss, Psycho Circus, and
you're grudging through it even if you don't like it.
Oh yeah, no, that's part of the deal. I got, even if I don't like it, I got to listen to it. So,
well, I was just telling you, I was on the road trip a few weeks ago, and my sister-in-law has a multi-thousand record collection. Like it's several thousand, and she posts one per day. That is, she listens to, and it actually has opened up my listening to things that she is posting now. She's posting the record, then I'm going to Spotify. But many times she got a pretty eclectic collection. Sometimes things are not on Spotify, so it really, I might have to buy the record or find the tape. Yeah, well, good to see you. Thank you so much. I quite love Wana Brands.
Thank you.
And I want to talk to you, but let's get into give us a little bit about, you've been at Wana for a long time. Give us your background at Wana, but even maybe what you're doing beforehand will set the stage for sort of the conversation.
Sure. So I'll fast forward to the first part of my career because mostly marketing and PR. So some bigger brands you maybe would know like Frontier Airlines and Smashburger. And then I was working for an agency. It was partnered in an ad agency here in Colorado. Started there in like 2009. And around 2010, a company came to us and wanted some help with branding for what they called a pot soda company at the time. And I talked to my partners. They were like, yeah, sure, we'll do that. So I found it fascinating. I'd always been a consumer, but never really understood specifically the industry itself and what was going on with medical and et cetera, et cetera. So I found it fascinating both to understand who was consuming, why they were consuming, the types of products that were available. And so after we did this work for them, I kept in touch with the guys that were running the company. And again, this is like 2010. And then Colorado voted in adult use in 2012, I think. Did not go into effect until January 2014. But during that period, they came back and said, look, we got to get ready for this adult use market. We got to change some things. And my partners were like, well, it's a little more visible now. We have big conservative clients. I don't know if we feel comfortable. And I said, well, I'm kind of interested in this, so I'm going to keep pursuing it. And so I ended up going to the company at that time was called, or still called Dixie Elixirs. And Dixie was my first official gig in cannabis. So January of 2014, started with them as their CMO. Spent 4 years at Dixie, and this was the very first market to launch. So involved in the regulatory framework and helping to shape the industry, and really exciting times and really fascinating to be part of that. then from there, I bounced around a little bit to a couple of different startups, some pure play startups where, there were 5 employees and we were trying to get funding and having all that kind of fun. And then right at the beginning of COVID, Nancy was the founder and at the time CEO of the company. She and I had been friends from pretty much the get-go. We'd see each other at the Capitol, we'd pick each other's brains, that kind of thing. And so I reached out to Nancy. She's like, well, come work for us. And so I did. So I started in my basement. It was the first week of lockdown here in Colorado for COVID. And so that was interesting. Got to meet my team over, whatever we're using at the time, Zoom, I guess. And so that was 4.5 years ago. And then ultimately Nancy decided to kind of pursue a couple of different things, including her foundation, which she started a couple of years ago. So the Wana Brand Foundation is a big part of what she's doing right now. And I stepped in as the president. So yeah, that's my story.
It's a pretty good run.
Yeah, it's all right. I mean, I think, I'll say this without meaning to be egotistical, that anybody can survive the cannabis industry for a dozen years. Yeah, either has high tolerance for pain or I don't know what.
Or yeah, definitely high tolerance for pain. But I think actually that's part of it. And one of the things I think Jeremy and I wanted to talk about is that longevity gives Wana an interesting perspective as you go into new markets, where not that new markets don't always have surprises, but there are fewer and fewer surprises the more and more markets that you go into. Have you, what is the benefit of going to a market like New York, having been in all the other markets that you're in? Are you better prepared? Do you know what's coming? Or are you just better at dealing with things being thrown at you?
It's a great question. I love the way you put it, because I would like to say we're better prepared, and maybe in some small ways we are, but we have a saying in our company, every market's a market, which is very true. They all vary, but also, it's a little bit like you see the boulder, it's going to roll down the hill. You're like, well, shit, that boulder's coming. We better get out of the way. But it's still it just comes down the hill, because you can't really get out of the way, because whether it's price compression or changes in regulation or AR issues or partner challenges, all of those things happen, and it's really challenging to prevent them from impacting you. But to your point, we are better prepared to handle those things when they happen.
Yeah. And how do you make decisions based on how and when to enter a market? Because, especially, 20 something markets and in various stages of rollout with various competition and entrenched brands or about to be brands. How do you make those decisions? Is there a big matrix where you put everything on a board and say, we think we can have this type of market share because we can find these partners to help us produce? What types of considerations do you think about? Maybe take New York as an example. What are some of the metrics that you use to address new markets?
Yeah, I think, it's not quite as data driven as that, in the sense that we look at the market, the players in the market, we look at pricing and kind of where it is currently and where we believe it's going to be. So back to the earlier question, it is one of the things that we know, 6 months in, we're going to begin to see price compression. We know which of our competitors come in and drop prices. And so those are considerations, but we ultimately look at what's the addressable market and what is the importance of the market to the overall system. So for New York, what's interesting about New York is that we actually sat back for a little bit. So the market obviously is New York, right? Who doesn't want to be in New York? But looking at everything that was going on between the proliferation of illicit shops, like we were talking about earlier, which have begun to dissipate, which is great, to how quickly they're rolling out licenses. So what is the potential revenue in that market, et cetera, et cetera. All those things made us say, it's not quite like this was, middle of last year. We're not quite ready to jump into that yet. We don't think the market's ready. Now, we just launched 2 weeks ago, which I think is the right timing. So all of those things are considerations. But then, we're also now in 20 markets in the U.S. plus Canada plus Switzerland. There's not that many more markets, and we could look at going into Rhode Island or a couple of other smaller markets. But the truth is, and I'm sure if you guys have done any amount of consulting or working in other businesses, that whether it's a small market or a big market, a lot of times the effort and the everything you have to put behind it is the same, and the return is just smaller, right? So, and particularly on the East Coast with some of these markets, as more and more markets come online, Pennsylvania will probably be one that we will go into that will have adult use probably next year. We have to really think about how do we cover that entirety of that footprint, and how much are we going to get Rhode Island? Like, people are already probably buying from a lot of other different markets. So
yeah.
Joe, I know you've had a long career in the marketing and PR world. How do you think about who Wana Brand's core consumer is? And does that change from market to market? Like, do you have a different Wana consumer in Colorado versus, maybe you talked about potentially Pennsylvania next year? How does that look, and who is that core consumer?
That's also a great question. So first thing I'll say is a little bit of a caveat in that we don't have access to a lot of data, both in general as the industry. I mean, and we're seeing more and more of it. So, on the sales side, we have access to, same day sales and inventory level and all that good stuff. But as far as it relates to the consumer, that's controlled really by the dispensary, right? They know who's going into their store, who's buying what they're buying our products with, et cetera. And it's challenging sometimes to get that data from dispensaries. So a lot of what we have is both anecdotal, some data from dispensaries, and a little bit of guesswork on our end. So we know a little bit about our consumer, not nearly enough, but we also have created a brand and a product, the SKU set that really was meant to appeal to a wide range of audience. So we have everything from connoisseur live rosin, gummies, to our Optimals line, which is a little bit more health and wellness oriented. So a sleep product. We just launched our Quick Relief, which is a pain product, and our Quick Lift, which is more of a mood enhancer type product. All of those are in the Optimals line. Then we have our fast acting line. Then we have our classic distillate line. So we're trying to appeal to a pretty wide range. But the reason why I think your question is really prescient for right now for us is we're having that very discussion, because at the end of the day, the market is evolving so quickly that we can't just sit back and say, well, we know who our consumer is. They're, about 30 to 36, and, they skew slightly more female than male. And, all of this traditional demographics doesn't really give us a whole lot. And particularly if we set it and we say, okay, that's who our consumer is, and forget, who else is coming into the store. So we're always trying to find new consumers. We're trying to appeal to existing consumers that maybe aren't buying our products. So there's a lot of work to be done there, and we're looking at that pretty hard right now.
And could you talk a little bit about how marketing a cannabis gummy is very different than what you've done previously in your career, right? Like, it's not a burger, it's not an airplane seat, it's a cannabis gummy. It's, it has all these regulations attached to it. I thought your point about, getting the data from the dispensaries being challenging was a very good one. So can you just talk about some of the difficulties that you encounter on a daily basis?
Yeah, well, on a daily basis,
Or
how long?
Daily, weekly, monthly, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the biggest one that you mentioned obviously is regulations, right? And they vary by state. Everything from the packaging, like in Florida and in other states, we can't call them gummies; we have to call them shoes. In Florida, they have to be colorless, and we fight that, by the way, on a regular basis. I know there's, I've heard some scuttlebutt here in Colorado that someone's trying to float a bill this year regarding edibles, and so it's something that we're constantly battling. And unfortunately, I'm just going to get on my soapbox for a quick second. The people that are trying to fight this don't understand that the consumer wants what the consumer wants. And if we're not selling it through the legal channel, they're getting it in the illegal channel, right? So who is that benefiting? How does that work? That logic doesn't seem to resonate with people who are anti-cannabis. But off the soapbox, back to the question. I think that the consumer is kind of ever changing for us, and so that's another bit of a difference. Like, if you're an airline, I don't want to say it's static. I mean, because obviously things change rapidly in the airline industry, and by the way, they're also heavily regulated as well. But the consumer is looking for a seat. Pricing, we know, is one of the most key things in the airline, and having amenities and things is important as well. But with a gummy, it's much more of a CPG type product, but you're also veering into this health and wellness category. So figuring out the messaging at the right place at the right time. And, our products are designed to have messaging that is differentiated attached to it. So our Quick products, what are the instances where you use Quick? When you go into a concert, when you're going to a happy hour and you want to have a 2 to 3 hour experience, it's a perfect product. We have to change that messaging and appeal to different audiences, not so much by demography, but more so by use case and how they potentially would consume that gummy. And it's interesting, we've been talking about the hemp space quite a bit. And when you think about the hemp space right now, on the regulated side, when you walk into a dispensary, it's everything cannabis. Anything you want cannabis will be in one store called a dispensary. In the other, I'll call it the real world, the rest of the world, you have stores that sell different things to different people at different times, right? You're not buying all things from one place, most likely. You don't go into a liquor store to buy a sleep product, for example. So it's a vastly different perspective, and we just get so myopic in this industry about our dispensary being the base, which it is, and bud tender still influences. We estimate about 70% of the purchasing decisions. So we have to really appeal to that bud tender to then appeal to the consumer. So also a little bit different than other industries.
Yeah.
So,
and can I ask you a question, because you're talking about Rhode Island in particular, and this is unique. Not unique. It was not unique to the West Coast or Colorado and West, because fewer and fewer people cross the border every day, cross state borders every day to buy anything, let alone cannabis.
yeah.
Whereas on the Northeast, people do it almost every day, right? I was just telling you, I was on a road trip. Like, there's parts of New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and Massachusetts, which people work in different places all the time. And same thing in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. It'll be the same thing in Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. Like, what type? I mean, I'm interested in sort of from a marketing perspective, how you think about that, because the regulations in each of those places are different, but the products may be in each of those places. I almost think about how do you train salespeople to sort of those different markets, even though they may be operating in 3 different places? Like, how do you think about that from a marketing perspective, given the regulations, given the products on the shelves? Is there advantages for someone like Wana where they will be in all those markets? Like, how do you prep a team for that, I guess?
Well, yeah, I mean, there definitely are advantages, and that's one of the things I think that we have done a really good job at. So being in 20 markets, we do have, I think, a decent sort of brand awareness, right? So if you're in New York, you maybe have bought us in Massachusetts, you've maybe bought us in Maryland, in other locations that are nearby, or New Jersey. So we do have that, the halo effect of the brand and having experienced consumers coming into a new market for us when we launch in that market. However, our products may vary. So it's a 5 milligram product in New Jersey and in Massachusetts due to the regulations, whereas you can get a 10 milligram product in other markets, right? So, and that's vastly different. And while you might say, well, it's just more THC, it's a different experience, right? Than the consumer has with your product in another market. So that's a variable. Flavor profiles and what we can do in those markets does change, and so we have to really prepare our sales folks to be ready to address the market as the market itself, right? We can't really, if we were to get into the business of trying to figure out, like, all right, this is a consumer coming from New Jersey, we're in New York, so we need to speak to them this way. I don't think we could do it, because it's just so each market is just so unique and specific to the market. And we're also using the dispensary as a conduit to convey the information about our product. And so we have to be specific to that dispensary in that market, including the regulations. We can't show fruit in certain markets, which is why by the way, we did away with all the fruit on our packaging, was because so many markets kept saying, well, we can't have fruit on the packaging or in displays. So we're like, all right, well, let's just go with the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
So.
Can I ask you, I want to zoom out and sort of talk about future state, and maybe sort of what you talk about when you have like full team conferences, when you sort of pull your team out and do it sort of a day long or 2 day long get-togethers. Like, what are you projecting the world will look like with rescheduling, maybe the next farm bill, right? Like multiple states, how do you actively prepare for a future state while also operating in 20 plus markets and releasing new products? Like, how do you prepare a company and the team for like an eventual state that might be a year or 10 away, but that Wana presumably will be well poised to take advantage of both bigger markets, but also, I mean, do you ever think about what interstate commerce might look like for you and how you'd prepare for that, or what federal legalization will look like for you, or even, 280E, like all those things that we think might be on the horizon? Like, how do you prepare for that, given that there's no timeline?
I have no idea. I'm hoping you guys can help me out with that.
That's why we're here today.
I mean,
That's on the smirk.
I honestly, it's interesting. I feel like we're one of the few industries that really, you can almost get in trouble by preparing too much for an eventuality that doesn't occur. I'll tell you that the company that acquired us, Canopy, a Canadian company, part of their plan was that legalization would occur in a more swift time frame than it has, right? And you can't prepare for it because you just don't know, and particularly because on the political side, we're a ping pong. Like, we get attached to other bills, we get used as bait for other discussions, and so I have, I'm a little cynical on this subject. I'll just warn you guys, because I feel like we're always at the whim of so many other things that get in the way of us trying to do business in the right way. And so when you ask me the question, how do we prepare? Well, we're aware, right? We watch what's going on in the markets, but we kind of also have to kind of focus on today and what's available today and how we operate today. Because if I was to invest too much into what happens after rescheduling, are we going to eventually have legalization? What happens with the Farm Bill? I would get stuck, right? Because what's going on is that the outer circle, I like to say the outer circle is going like this. The outer circle is going really slow. The inner circle is moving like this. And we're on the inner circle all the time, but that outer circle is just, barely ticking along. And so I can't really prepare for that. I just have to say, let's keep our eye on it. Let's be aware of it. And once we have something definitive and we know this is going to happen and this is how, then we can act on it.
So going off that, all the regulatory stuff, you are about to be part of Canopy growth. How does that change things for you, Joe, in terms of, maybe A, strategy, and B, what it's like to be part of, be a U.S. company, part of another U.S. company that's now part of a Canadian company? Like, how does this all work and how does it fit together?
It can be challenging at times in the sense that it is a complicated model. But here's the good news. All great people, all really solid companies, and we're all, ready, willing, and able to kind of work together to figure it out. So there's, as with any kind of a consolidation like that, there's low-hanging fruit, and then there's long-term strategy, and what does that look like? The low-hanging fruit stuff is we're figuring out ways that we can all work together better, more closely. At the same time, the message is, but run your businesses in the way that you think they should be run, and in the way that they're going to be most successful. So we do have that autonomy as we're looking at what are those potential synergies? How can we possibly work together to find some efficiencies in this relationship? But it's very early days, right? And so, and it's also a unique model with Canopy USA, Canopy Growth being completely separate, and then the companies that are part of Canopy USA, us and Jetty, and potentially Acreage once that deal finally closes. And so, we're all kind of figuring it out, because it's not something that's really been done before, which is kind of what makes it exciting and unique as well.
Joe, I want to get you back to your day. Well, even your listening of cassettes on Spotify, that's what I'm going to call it. It's Joe's new hobby, cassettes on Spotify. And you can put together a playlist on Spotify and share it. It'll be a whole thing that Wana can put out. But I appreciate the time today. Appreciate the conversation. We look forward to seeing you as time moves on. And thanks for your time today.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to meet you both.
You got it. Well, I'm just going to read everybody out. That is Cultivated Live for today. We'll be back tomorrow with Krista Raymer from Vitrina talking all things cannabis. Retail will also be running probably tomorrow, a conversation I had yesterday with Cy Scott of Headset, doing a deep dive into the rescheduling comment period. He did not read all 42,000 comments, but he did do an analysis on all of them. I did want to make sure that people knew that. We'll see you right here on LinkedIn and YouTube tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. Remember, buy cannabis or gummies or chews, but make sure they're Wana at a local dispensary. We'll see everybody tomorrow. All right, we're out.